The desert sun was merciless, pressing down on the barren training field like a heavy iron lid. Heat waves rippled across the cracked earth, and the soldiers of Alpha Squad shifted uncomfortably in their gear, the weight of their packs digging into their shoulders. Sweat rolled down their faces and soaked their fatigues, but none dared to complain. Sergeant James Miller was not a man known for patience, and today his patience was already stretched thin. This was their 13th attempt. 12 times they had failed to complete what, on paper, was a straightforward exercise. The objective: stabilize a simulated casualty and transport him to safety within 10 minutes, under simulated battlefield conditions. The test was designed to measure their coordination, speed, and medical training. But somehow, despite their discipline in other drills, they could not get this one right. Miller paced back and forth in front of them, boots grinding into the sand. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with the kind of voice that could silence a room even without shouting. Normally, his confidence alone kept the squad steady. But now, for the first time in weeks of training, cracks were showing. "All right, Alpha Squad," he barked, his voice edged with frustration. "You know the drill. Casualty is down. Timer starts the moment I give the signal. And this time, I don't want to see chaos. I want to see soldiers. You hear me?" "Yes, Sergeant." The squad shouted in unison, though the usual energy was gone. Their voices were flat, weighed down by exhaustion and embarrassment. Miller's jaw tightened. He could feel their morale slipping, and it was like sand running through his fingers. This exercise was not just about passing a test, it was about survival. In the real world, out there on deployment, failure meant death. He knew it, and deep down, they knew it too. "Get ready," Miller said, lifting his hand. The training officer overseeing the exercise, clipboard in hand, gave a small nod. A whistle blew, piercing the hot air, and the simulation began. Private Daniels was the first to move, sprinting toward the dummy casualty sprawled in the dust. Daniels was tall and fast, always eager to prove himself, but in his rush, he fumbled with the medical kit. Supplies spilled across the ground, bandages rolling into the dirt. "Damn it, Daniels!" barked Corporal Lewis, diving down to help him. "We don't have time for this." Meanwhile, Private Chun knelt by the casualty, his hands trembling as he tried to apply pressure to the fake wound. He pressed too lightly, failing to stop the simulated bleeding. The training sensors beeped angrily, signaling another error. "Harder, Chun!" Miller roared. "Pretend it's real blood. That man is dying under your hands, and you're tickling him." The squad scrambled, shouting over each other, their movements disorganized. One tried to ready the stretcher, while another attempted to insert and foreline, but their coordination collapsed. Sweat dripped into their eyes, nerves frayed, and every mistake compounded the next. The whistle shrieked again. Time was up. Another failure. Miller's chest heaved with frustration. "That's number 12, he muttered, mostly to himself. He looked at their faces ashen, defeated, ashamed. Some avoided his gaze, staring at the dirt. Others clenched their fists in quiet anger. Unacceptable. Miller's voice thundered. 12 times. 12 damn times you've let that man die. Do you think the enemy is going to give you 12 tries? Do you think war is going to wait while you figure it out?" Silence. No one dared to answer. The training officer scribbled on his clipboard, expression unreadable. Miller hated that look, the kind that said, "Your squad is slipping, Sergeant." He couldn't afford that. Not here. Not now. He wiped the sweat from his brow and shouted, louder this time, his voice cracking for the first time that day. "Any medics here? Anyone in this squad know how to save a life? Or are you all just going to stand there and watch him bleed out again?" His words hung in the air like a challenge. The soldiers shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances, but no one stepped forward. Daniels looked at his boots. Chun bit his lip, ashamed. Corporal Lewis shook his head slightly, too exhausted to speak. For the first time since training began, Miller felt something dangerous creeping in helplessness. He prided himself on molding recruits into soldiers, on finding strength where none existed. But right now, staring at his squad, he saw only doubt and failure. He turned his gaze across the line of recruits, eyes narrowing. Some of them avoided his stare. Others tried to look determined despite their exhaustion. Then his eyes paused, just for a fraction of a second, on Private Emily Carter. She stood at the far end of the line, helmet tucked under one arm, her face flushed from the heat. She had spoken little during training, rarely drawing attention. Miller barely remembered the sound of her voice. She looked young, almost too young to be standing among them, her quiet demeanor making her nearly invisible. But there was something in her eyes. A flicker. A spark he couldn't place. It was gone the moment he saw it, replaced by the same weariness the others carried. Miller shook his head and growled, turning away. "Reset the drill," he ordered the training officer. His voice was hard, but inside, doubt gnawed at him. As the squad shuffled into position again, Emily's hands tightened around her helmet. Her heart pounded, her stomach twisted. She had watched 12 failures unfold, each one worse than the last. She knew what had gone wrong every single time. She knew how to fix it. She had known since the first attempt. But she said nothing. The squad didn't know about the countless hours she had spent at the county hospital back home, volunteering after school. They didn't know about the late nights in emergency rooms, where she had held patients' hands, handed tools to nurses, and learned how to keep calm when every second mattered. They didn't know that under her quiet surface lay skills that could have saved their simulated casualty 10 times over. No one knew because Emily never told them. She looked at the sergeant, his face lined with frustration, his voice hoarse from shouting. She looked at her squadmates, too proud or too fearful to admit they were lost. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Not yet. The whistle blew again. Attempt number 13 had begun. Private Emily Carter stood quietly at the far edge of the training field, the sun beating down on her, just as it did on the others, but it felt heavier on her shoulders. Sweat trickled down her temple, disappearing into her collar, but she made no move to wipe it away. Her hands gripped the rim of her helmet, so tightly her knuckles whitened, yet she remained still, unnoticed. That was how it always was. Emily had mastered the art of being invisible. In formation, she blended into the line. During drills, she performed her tasks efficiently, but without flourish, never drawing attention. She was not weak, far from it, but she carried herself with a quiet reserve that kept others from noticing her strengths. The other recruits were louder, bolder, desperate to impress Sergeant Miller. Daniels always volunteered first, eager to prove himself. Lewis commanded with authority whenever Miller allowed him to lead. Chun cracked nervous jokes to cover his mistakes, and the rest of the squad fell somewhere in between. But Emily, she remained in the background, overlooked, as if silence were her camouflage. What her squad didn't know, what no one here knew, was that Emily Carter had more real-world experience in emergencies than all of them combined. Back in Ohio, before enlisting, Emily had spent years volunteering at the county hospital. She had started at 16, working long hours after school and on weekends. At first, she delivered supplies, changed linens, and fetched coffee for overworked nurses. But soon, her steady hands and calm demeanor earned her more responsibility. She helped prepare equipment for procedures, learned how to read vital signs, and even assisted in basic wound care under supervision. There had been nights when ambulances screamed through the E-doors, unloading patients clinging to life. Emily had stood just feet away as trauma teams swarmed in, voices sharp but controlled. She remembered the adrenaline in those moments, the way the room vibrated with urgency, the air so thick with tension, it was hard to breathe. And yet, she never panicked. She had learned to focus on what needed to be done, to block out fear, and to act. Those nights shaped her. While her classmates went to football games or parties, Emily was in the hospital, watching lives saved and sometimes lost. She had seen the fragility of the human body, the razor-thin line between survival and tragedy. And she had learned, over and over, that hesitation could mean death. It was why she had joined the army, not for glory, not for recognition, but because she wanted her skills to matter where they were needed most. She wanted to serve, to protect, to heal. But standing here, among recruits who barely noticed her, Emily wondered if she had made a mistake. As the squad stumbled through their 13th attempt, she watched with quiet agony. Danielle's fumbled again, too rushed to think. Chun's hands still trembled, applying pressure unevenly. The stretcher team tripped over one another, their coordination collapsing into chaos. She could see every flaw, every wasted second, every mistake that doomed the exercise before it even began. Her stomach knotted. She wanted to shout at them, to take charge, to show them how to do it right. But her throat tightened every time she thought about speaking up. She remembered her first day in basic training, when she had tried to share an idea during a drill. A louder recruit had cut her off, dismissing her suggestion before she could finish. "Save it for later, Carter," he had said with a laugh. "Let the real leaders handle this." The others had laughed too, not cruelly, but enough to make her retreat into herself. Since then, she had stayed quiet, letting others take the spotlight. Now, with Miller's voice booming across the field, Emily felt that same hesitation clawing at her. He had shouted, "Any medics here?" And every fiber of her being had screamed yes. But the word never left her lips. Fear chained it inside her chest. She feared the skepticism in her squadmates' eyes. She feared their laughter if she failed. She feared standing in the center of the circle, all eyes on her, her quiet nature exposed to judgment. And yet, she also feared something else, watching them fail again and again until they broke completely. The whistle shrieked. Time expired. Another failure. Sergeant Miller's rage shook the air. His voice cracked as he berated them, and the squad stood in silence, shame heavy on their shoulders. Emily kept her gaze low, staring at the ground, but her mind was loud with thoughts. She could have done it. She should have done it. Why didn't she? As they reset for yet another attempt, Emily drifted into memory. She saw herself at 16, standing in an A hallway as doctors fought to save a man with a gunshot wound. Blood soaked the sheets, alarms blared, voices shouted for tools she barely understood at the time. And yet, she had moved fetching supplies, steadying equipment, doing whatever was asked. She had been terrified, but she hadn't let it paralyze her. That night, the man had survived. If she could act then, why couldn't she act now? Her eyes flicked toward Sergeant Miller. His broad frame was tense, his jaw clenched, but beneath the anger, she saw something else: fear. Not fear of failure on paper, but fear of what it meant. Fear that when the time came, his squad wouldn't be ready for real combat, real casualties, real death. Emily swallowed hard. She understood his fear. She shared it. The whistle blew again. Attempt number 14. The squad moved like broken machinery, parts grinding but never fitting together. Daniels barked orders that contradicted Lewis's instructions. Chun second-guessed himself, looking to others for direction. Their mistakes piled up, predictable, like watching a car crash in slow motion. Emily's fingers tightened on her helmet. Her chest ached. She couldn't do this anymore. She couldn't stand by silent, as failure repeated itself. Her lips parted. Her breath caught. But once again, the moment passed. The whistle shrieked. Time up. Another failure. She cursed herself silently. Why couldn't she just speak? The squad shuffled back into line, shoulders slumped, faces drawn. Miller glared at them, but his voice was hoarse now, his fury drained. "We'll keep doing this," he growled, "until one of you figures it out. Or until you all collapse. I don't care." Emily glanced at her squadmates. They were tired, yes, but they weren't broken yet. Not completely. They could still be saved. And she knew she was the one who could save them. But the words caught again, trapped in the prison of her own silence. She bit the inside of her cheek, tasting copper. Next time, she told herself. Next time, I'll speak. As the sun sank lower and shadows stretched across the training ground, the squad braced for yet another attempt. The whistle hovered, ready to blow again. Emily stood at the edge of the line, her heart pounding louder than the desert wind. She had been invisible all her life, but invisibility was no longer an option. Not if they were going to survive this. The whistle pierced the air once more, signaling the start of yet another attempt. The squad, drained and demoralized, moved forward like machines running out of fuel. Their boots pounded against the dry earth, raising dust clouds that swirled around them. The simulated casualty lay waiting on the ground, still and lifeless. By now, the sight had become a cruel reminder of their incompetence. Private Daniels rushed ahead as usual, grabbing the medical kit. His hands, slick with sweat, slipped against the straps, and the kit nearly toppled out of his grip. "I got it! I got it!" he shouted defensively, though no one had said a word yet. His voice cracked with nerves, betraying his attempt at bravado. "Focus, Daniels." Corporal Lewis barked, already kneeling beside the casualty. "We don't have time for mistakes." Private Chun crouched near the dummy, fumbling with the bandages. His fingers trembled so violently that the roll unraveled before he could apply it. He cursed under his breath, trying again, but his hands wouldn't cooperate. The heat, the failures, the pressure, it all compounded until his body refused to obey his mind. "Apply pressure," Miller roared, his voice sharp and jagged. "He's bleeding out in front of you, Chun. What the hell are you waiting for?" "I'm trying, Sergeant," Chun stammered, pressing down with uncertain hands. A sensor let out an angry buzz, signaling insufficient pressure. His face paled. Meanwhile, two other recruits wrestled with the stretcher, their movements clumsy and uncoordinated. One lifted before the other was ready, nearly dropping it onto the ground. Their frustration boiled over into shouting. "Lift when I lift." One snapped. "I was lifting." "You weren't ready." The other shot back. "Shut up and move," Lewis yelled, his patience gone. The scene dissolved into chaos, shouting, fumbling, sensors blaring. The squad no longer looked like soldiers. They looked like frightened recruits, drowning in their own mistakes. Emily Carter stood at the edge of the circle, helmet still clutched against her chest. Her eyes darted across every failure, every second wasted. She knew exactly what to do. She could see the steps as clearly as if they'd been written on a board. Secure the airway, apply pressure with steady hands, control the bleeding, prep the transport. It wasn't complicated not to her, but her lips remained sealed. Her heart pounded against her ribs, screaming at her to step forward. Yet her voice, her cursed, timid voice, would not rise. She feared that the moment she spoke, all eyes would turn, and judgment would fall heavy on her shoulders. The whistle shrieked. "Time up." Another failure. Sergeant Miller's face flushed red as he slammed his fist against his thigh. The sound cracked through the silence like gunfire. "That's 14. 14 failures. His voice was raw now, hoarse from shouting all day, but the anger burned as fiercely as ever. Do you think this is a game? Do you think when a man is bleeding out on the battlefield, you'll have 15 chances to get it right? The squad stood frozen, their shame etched into their faces. Some avoided his gaze, others looked like they wanted to vanish into the earth. Daniels muttered something under his breath, earning a glare from Lewis that silenced him immediately. Miller's chest heaved. He had been a soldier long enough to see fear in men's eyes, but this wasn't fear of combat, it was fear of failure. And that was worse. Fear of failure ate at discipline, hollowed out resolve, and left only doubt. If he couldn't break through that now, what chance did they have when it was real? He spun on his heel, his voice breaking as he shouted again. Any medics here? Anyone at all? Or are we just going to let this poor bastard die over and over until we all collapse? The words echoed across the training field, sharp and bitter. His desperation was laid bare for the first time. Emily's breath caught. Her heart leapt into her throat. Say it, she urged herself silently. Just say it. She could feel the moment stretching, begging for her to step in. But fear pinned her in place. She felt her throat tighten, her mouth go dry, her body betray her will. Her silence became a cage she couldn't break free from. Around her, the other recruits shifted uncomfortably. Daniels glanced at Chun. Chun looked at the ground. No one spoke. No one moved. Miller's jaw clenched so hard, it looked like it might crack. He stared at them, disgust and disappointment etched into every line of his face. Pathetic, he muttered, his voice low now, dangerous. The training officer, still scribbling notes on his clipboard, glanced at Miller with a raised eyebrow. That look only twisted the knife deeper. Miller wasn't just fighting his squad's failure anymore. He was fighting judgment from above. And that was something he couldn't tolerate. Reset. Miller barked. His voice shook, not from weakness, but from the sheer weight of frustration. We go again. The squad groaned inwardly, though none dared make a sound. Their bodies moved slowly, dragging themselves into position, like men marching toward execution. Emily's hands trembled against her helmet. She felt sick, her stomach turning with every second. She couldn't keep watching this. She couldn't keep standing silent while they failed again and again. Her lungs ached with the words she couldn't say. She thought back to the AA again, to the moments where she had no choice but to act. To the night when a car crash victim was rushed in, unconscious, his chest rising shallowly. The nurses had barked instructions, and Emily had moved instinctively fetching equipment, holding oxygen, pressing down on wounds to slow the bleeding. Her hands had been steady then. She hadn't faltered. She hadn't been invisible. So why now? Why, when these were supposed to be her brothers in arms, could she not step forward? The whistle blew again. Attempt 15 began. Chaos erupted instantly. Daniels barked orders that clashed with Lewis's commands. Chun fumbled worse than before, the pressure of repeated failure making his hands completely unreliable. The stretcher team nearly tripped over each other in the dust. God damn it, do it right, Miller shouted, but his voice was drowned in the storm of panic. Emily's nails dug into her palms. She couldn't breathe. Every instinct screamed at her to step in, to stop this madness, to take control. She could see the steps as clearly as the lines on her hand. But still she stayed frozen, fear choking her like a noose. The whistle shrieked. Time expired. Another failure. The squad collapsed into silence, panting, sweating, defeated. Miller turned his back, staring out at the horizon as if searching for patience in the empty desert. His shoulders rose and fell heavily. Emily bit her lip until she tasted blood. She couldn't take it anymore. She couldn't stand by and let this cycle continue. She couldn't keep betraying herself. Next time, she promised. Next time I will speak. Her promise echoed in her mind, fragile but determined. She would break free of her silence. She had to, because if she didn't, this squad would never rise, and she would never forgive herself. The whistle hung in the air again, ready to sound. Attempt 16 loomed, and Emily Carter, the quiet recruit, felt the walls of her silence begin to crack. The sun was dropping lower, dragging the desert into a furnace of orange and gold. The heat still pressed down like a fist, but now fatigue was layered over it, thick and suffocating. Alpha Squad stood in loose formation, dust clinging to their boots, eyes glazed with exhaustion. Their bodies were battered by failure, but it was their pride that had taken the heaviest beating. 15 attempts, 15 failures. Sergeant Miller's voice rasped as he barked the reset order again. His throat was raw from shouting all day, but he refused to stop. His jaw clenched, his chest heaved. He wasn't just training recruits anymore. He was fighting for their survival. And they were failing him. Emily Carter's heart pounded as she shifted her helmet from one hand to the other. She could feel the weight of the silence pressing down after Miller's outburst. "Any medics here?" The words still rang in her ears, sharp and desperate. She had nearly spoken. She had nearly broken the chains that held her voice prisoner. But fear had gagged her again, trapping her in the shadows of her own silence. Now, as the whistle shrieked again, she watched attempt 16 unfold. Daniels dashed forward, too fast, too reckless. Supplies spilled. Chun froze again, paralyzed by his own trembling hands. The stretcher team fought over who should lift first, voices rising into bickering chaos. Miller's roar cut through them, but his words no longer carried order. They carried despair. Emily couldn't breathe. Each second that passed was another knife twisting in her chest. She saw every mistake, every wasted movement. Her mind screamed the solution. Do this, not that. Apply pressure here. Stabilize before you move. But the words never left her lips. The whistle ended the attempt. 16. Failed. The squad stood in silence, chests heaving, faces hollow. Some looked ready to collapse. Others looked like they'd given up entirely. Miller glared at them, eyes dark with fury and something worse doubt. His voice cracked as he growled, "I've led squads in combat. I've buried friends who never got a second chance. And here we are, failing over and over like children playing war." The words hit hard. No one spoke. Emily's lips parted slightly. She felt the words on her tongue. "I can do it." The 4 simple syllables that would shatter her silence. But fear clutched at her throat, squeezing. What if they laughed? What if she failed? What if, after all this, she proved herself worthless? Then she looked at Miller. He stood with his shoulders rigid, fists clenched at his sides, his anger hiding a deep, raw desperation. He wasn't asking for perfection anymore. He was begging for someone to rise. Anyone. Emily swallowed hard. She couldn't stay silent. Not this time. She inhaled, shaky but deep, and stepped forward. "I can try," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost swallowed by the desert wind. For a moment, no one reacted. Daniels blinked in surprise. Chun glanced sideways. Lewis frowned, as if unsure he'd heard right. Miller's head snapped toward her. His eyes narrowed, studying her like he was seeing her for the first time. "What did you say, Carter?" Emily's throat tightened, but she forced the words out louder this time. "I can try, Sergeant. Let me take the lead." Silence fell across the squad. The only sounds were the buzz of insects and the faint rustle of wind over sand. All eyes were on her now, and the weight of their stares pressed down harder than the sun ever could. Daniel scoffed softly. You? We've been at this all day. What makes you think? Shut it, Daniels, Miller snapped, his voice like a whip. He didn't take his eyes off Emily. Carter, you're telling me you can do this? You've been standing there, silent, watching us fail 16 damn times, and now you step forward? Emily held his gaze, her pulse pounding in her ears. Yes, Sergeant. I can do this. For a moment, Miller said nothing. He searched her face, looking for hesitation, for weakness. But what he found instead was something he hadn't seen in any of the others today, Con. Not bravado like Daniels, not panic like Chun, not weariness like Lewis, just steady, quiet certainty. He exhaled slowly. Fine, he said, voice low but firm. Show me. The squad exchanged uneasy glances. Daniels muttered under his breath again, but one sharp look from Miller silenced him. Lewis raised an eyebrow, skeptical but curious. Chun swallowed nervously, unsure what to expect. Emily stepped into the circle, her boots crunching on the gravel. For the first time since training began, she felt every eye on her. The weight of their doubt pressed down like a mountain, but beneath it burned a spark of defiance. She would not be invisible anymore. She knelt beside the casualty dummy, setting her helmet down carefully. Her hands hovered for a moment, then steadied. She inhaled once, clearing her mind, letting the noise of the squad fade into the background. All she saw was the patient before her. Airway, she murmured softly, more to herself than to anyone else. She tilted the dummy's head, checked the passage, cleared it smoothly. Her hands moved with practiced ease. Bleeding, she continued, pressing down firmly on the simulated wound. The sensor beeped once, then went silent, registering correct pressure. The squad leaned closer, watching. Their disbelief began to crack. Emily worked quickly, efficiently, never rushing, but never faltering. Her voice remained calm, steady, narrating each step as if she were teaching. She directed the stretcher team without raising her voice, her tone controlled but confident. On my mark, lift together. 1, 2, 3. This time they lifted in sync. No fumbling, no shouting. Sergeant Miller's eyes widened slightly. The training officer glanced up from his clipboard for the first time all day. Emily secured the casualty, checked vitals, and stabilized everything within minutes. Her movements were fluid, precise, a choreography born not of guesswork but of experience. The whistle blew. Silence followed. Then the training officer's voice cut through. Successful execution. Perfect timing. Flawless. The squad stared at Emily as if seeing a ghost. Daniel's mouth hung open. Chun blinked rapidly, disbelief plain on his face. Lewis shook his head slowly, stunned. Sergeant Miller stepped forward, his shadow falling across her. For a moment, Emily braced herself, afraid he'd scold her for waiting so long. But instead, he spoke with something she hadn't expected: respect. Well, Carter, he said, his voice quieter now but firm. Looks like you just saved the whole damn squad. Emily exhaled, a tremor of relief washing through her. Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't shrink back. Not this time. For the first time in her life, she had stepped out of the shadows. And in that single decision, everything changed. The desert air carried an eerie stillness after the whistle's shrill note faded. For a heartbeat, no one moved. It was as if time itself had paused, unwilling to break the fragile shock that gripped Alpha Squad. Emily Carter stood over the casualty dummy, hands still resting lightly on the straps she'd secured, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Her gloves were smeared with dust, but her movements were precise, her posture composed. Sergeant Miller exhaled, a long, low breath that almost sounded like disbelief. Well, I'll be damned. His voice wasn't loud this time. It wasn't sharp or cutting. It carried weight, but softer, like a man realizing the battlefield had just shifted in a way he hadn't expected. Daniels muttered something, but even he didn't sound cocky now. His usual swagger had slipped, replaced by unease. Lewis rubbed the back of his neck, his eyes darting between Miller and Emily. Chun simply stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like he wanted to speak, but couldn't form words. Emily straightened slowly, brushing grit off her uniform. Her eyes didn't meet theirs immediately. For so long she'd trained herself to avoid attention, to stay invisible. But invisibility had evaporated the moment her hands saved them. When she finally lifted her gaze, she found every pair of eyes locked on her. She didn't shrink this time. "Carter," Miller barked, but not unkindly. "Where the hell did that come from?" Emily hesitated, then spoke clearly. "I volunteered at a hospital before enlisting, Sergeant. Emergency care. Trauma response." The squad blinked. Daniels let out a short laugh, but it wasn't mocking. It was nervous. "You mean, all this time you knew what to do? And you just stood back?" Her lips pressed together. "I didn't think anyone wanted to hear it. I didn't want to overstep." Miller's jaw tightened. His eyes darkened, but this time not with anger at her, at himself perhaps. At the fact that he, a seasoned leader, had missed what had been right in front of him. "Overstep?" He repeated, his voice low. "Carter, you just accomplished in minutes what this squad couldn't do all damn day. You didn't overstep. You stepped up." The words landed heavy in the air. Emily's cheeks warmed, but she nodded once. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply accepted it with the same quiet steadiness she'd shown while working. The training officer, clipboard in hand, finally spoke. That was textbook. Smooth under pressure, efficient communication, zero wasted movement. "Honestly, Sergeant, if the rest of your recruits performed at her level, this would be the easiest evaluation I've ever overseen." The squad shifted uncomfortably. They weren't used to praise, not like this, and certainly not directed at someone they'd ignored all day. Miller cleared his throat. "All right. You all heard that. Carter's just shown you how it's done. Now we're running this drill again under her lead." The squad's heads snapped toward him. Daniels raised an eyebrow. "Wait, she's leading? She's not even... Do you have a problem with that, Daniels?" Miller cut in, his tone brooking no argument. Daniels shut his mouth. Emily's pulse jumped. Lead the team? She'd barely managed to find the courage to step forward. Once now, she was being put at the head of the line. A ripple of fear threatened to choke her again, but she pushed it back down. She had just proven she could do this. The squad needed her. She knelt again by the casualty, her voice calm. Positions. Daniels and Lewis, stretcher team. Chun, supplies. Follow my count. They hesitated for only a moment before obeying. Something about her tone made them move. It wasn't loud, but it carried authority, born of certainty. She ran them through the steps. Airway cleared. Bleeding controlled. Patient stabilized. Movements coordinated. This time, instead of chaos, there was flow. Emily's calm became contagious, spreading through the team like water cooling hot iron. The whistle blew. Success. Miller crossed his arms, watching closely. Again, he ordered. They reset. Emily guided. Success again. By the third run, something remarkable happened. Daniels, usually quick to argue, began asking her questions, not sarcastic ones, but genuine. Should I grip higher on the stretcher? Like this? And when she corrected him, he nodded without protest. Chun, always nervous, steadied under her guidance. Emily encouraged him gently, when he fumbled with a bandage. "You're doing fine. Keep the pressure consistent." His hands stopped trembling. Even Lewis, skeptical at first, started moving in perfect sync with her timing. And Miller? He didn't intervene once. He just watched, silent, his sharp eyes studying Emily like a new piece of the puzzle he hadn't known he was missing. By the end of the hour, Alpha Squad, once fractured, fumbling, and failing, executed 3 flawless rescues under Emily's command. The training officer scribbled furiously, shaking his head in astonishment. When the final whistle sounded, Miller called them into formation. Dust swirled around their boots as they lined up, faces flushed, breaths ragged. Emily took her place among them, helmet tucked under her arm, trying not to let the pounding of her heart show. Miller paced in front of them, his gaze sharp but not unkind. Finally, he stopped and looked directly at Emily. "Carter, you've been hiding in plain sight. I don't know whether to chew you out for staying silent this long, or thank you for saving my damn squad. But one thing's certain, you've earned my respect." Emily's breath caught. Respect. From him. From them. The word felt heavier than any metal could. He turned to the rest. "Let this be a lesson. Never underestimate anyone. The quiet ones might be the ones who save your life someday." Today, Carter proved that. The squad's eyes shifted toward her again. But this time the looks weren't skeptical or dismissive. They were filled with something else entirely: respect. For the first time since she'd enlisted, Emily Carter wasn't invisible. The desert had grown quieter, as if even the wind had paused to witness what had just happened. Dust clung to Alpha Squad's uniforms. Sweat streaked across their brows. But something heavier hung in the air, a stunned silence that no one dared to break. They had all seen it, lived it, felt the weight of failure dissolve under Emily Carter's hands. The training officer's whistle still echoed in their ears, his clipped voice repeating like a mantra. Flawless execution. Daniels stared at Emily as though he'd never seen her before. His usual grin, the cocky smirk that got him through mistakes, was gone. He rubbed the back of his neck, muttering under his breath, "Unbelievable." Lewis, always the level-headed one, just kept shaking his head slowly, his lips pressed tight as if words weren't enough. Chun, who usually trembled at every drill, looked at Emily with wide eyes full of something foreign trust. And Sergeant Miller, the man who had carried himself all day with fire and fury, now stood still, arms crossed, jaw clenched tight. He wasn't just looking at Emily. He was measuring her, studying her with a weight that made her shift on her feet, unsure if she'd impressed him or angered him more. Finally, Miller broke the silence. "Carter," he said, voice low but carrying enough power to snap every spine straight. "Step forward." Emily obeyed. Her boots crunched against the gravel as she moved to the front, her helmet tucked tight against her hip. She tried to keep her shoulders square, but her pulse betrayed her, racing like a trapped bird. Miller's eyes bored into her. "Where in God's name have you been hiding that skill?" Emily swallowed, steadying herself. "I wasn't hiding, Sergeant. I just didn't think it was my place." Everyone else seemed louder. Miller cut in, raising an eyebrow. More confident? More full of themselves? He glanced briefly at Daniels, who shifted uncomfortably. Confidence doesn't win battles. Competence does. And you, Carter, you just showed me more competence in 20 minutes than I've seen in this squad all day. Her cheeks warmed, but she held her ground. She dreamed of being acknowledged, but hearing it now, out loud, with every set of eyes on her, it was overwhelming. Daniels finally spoke, his voice half defensive, half curious. "So what, she's just better than all of us? That's what we're saying?" Miller's head whipped toward him. "What we're saying, Daniels, is that Carter proved what leadership looks like. She saw the problem, she fixed it, and she didn't need to shout about it first. You could learn something from that. Daniels opened his mouth, then shut it again. For once he didn't argue. The squad stood at ease, yet none of them looked relaxed. Respect was dawning slowly, replacing pride, forcing them to confront an uncomfortable truth. They had underestimated her. Emily lowered her gaze briefly, her thoughts swirling. For years, she had blended into the background, letting others take the spotlight, convinced her voice would only weigh down the room. Now she had stepped forward once, and everything had changed. Part of her thrilled at the acknowledgement, but another part of her trembled at the responsibility it carried. Respect wasn't something she had expected. It was something she had earned, and earning it meant she couldn't slip back into silence again. The training officer cleared his throat, flipping his clipboard closed. Sergeant Miller, I'll make this official. Alpha Squad has passed this phase of training. Carter's execution was beyond standard. If you're smart, you'll use her strengths moving forward. He strode away, leaving the squad in the thick of their shifting emotions. Miller turned back to his recruits. Listen up. Today wasn't just about a drill. It was about pressure, about failure, about seeing who you are when things don't go right. And while the rest of you collapsed, Carter stood up. That's what matters. His eyes swept over them all, lingering on Daniels, Chun, Lewis. Each of them shifted under the weight of his gaze. Then he stopped again on Emily. You're not invisible anymore, Carter. You've got more than just skill. You've got steel. And I'll expect you to use it. Emily nodded, her throat tight. Yes, Sergeant. The squad was dismissed shortly after, but the silence lingered as they gathered their gear. The usual chatter, the jokes, the groans of exhaustion gone. Instead, they kept sneaking glances at Emily, as if trying to reconcile the girl they'd ignored all day with the one who had just saved them from humiliation. Daniels approached her finally, his swagger dulled. He cleared his throat. So, Carter, you really knew what you were doing back there. Emily gave him a small smile, not unkind. That was the idea. He shifted awkwardly, scratching at the dust on his sleeve. Guess I owe you one. Or maybe 12. His chuckle was weak, but it wasn't cruel. Lewis came next, offering a simple nod. Good work. You kept us together. I won't forget that. Even Chun, still pale from the stress, whispered, Thanks. For not yelling at me. I think I did better because of that. Emily nodded to each of them, her humility disarming. She didn't gloat, didn't rub their failures in their faces. She simply accepted their words with the same quiet steadiness she had shown all along. Later, as the squad trudged back toward camp under the fading light, Miller walked a step behind, his thoughts heavy. He had prided himself on being able to read people, on knowing who had the spark and who didn't. But Emily Carter had proven him wrong. She hadn't just saved the drill. She had reminded him that leadership wasn't about volume. It was about action. And he, a seasoned sergeant, had almost overlooked her. That realization gnawed at him, but it also lit a fire. He would not make the mistake again. Not with her. Not with anyone. As night settled over the desert, Alpha Squad ate in near silence, exhaustion dulling their edges. Yet beneath the quiet, something had shifted. Respect had been born fragile, new, but real. Emily sat at the edge of the firelight, helmet beside her, her meal half forgotten as she stared into the flames. She could feel it, the eyes that no longer dismissed her, the weight of expectations she'd never carried before. It scared her. It thrilled her. It was hers now. And though she didn't know what tomorrow's drills would bring, one thing was certain. Emily Carter was no longer the quiet girl in the back. She was the medic who saved them all. And they would never forget it. The desert dawn came cold, a sharp contrast to the searing heat of the day before. Alpha Squad rose sluggishly, their muscles aching, uniforms stiff with sweat and dust. Yet beneath the fatigue, there was a different kind of energy pulsing through Camp 1 that hadn't been there before. Respect had a way of changing everything. Emily Carter sat quietly by the mess tent, her hands wrapped around a tin mug of bitter coffee. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, but she could feel it now, the subtle glances, the murmurs just out of earshot. It wasn't ridicule anymore. It wasn't dismissal. It was something heavier, something she wasn't sure she knew how to carry. Sergeant Miller gathered them after breakfast. His stance was as rigid as ever, but his tone had shifted. Less sharp, less punishing. There was weight in his words now, but also clarity. Yesterday, he began, his voice cutting across the morning stillness. You all learned something more important than any drill. You learned what happens when you underestimate someone. You learned what happens when you ignore the quiet voice in the room. His gaze moved across the squad, lingering briefly on Daniels, and Chun, and Lewis. Finally, it landed on Emily. Carter showed you what leadership looks like. And it didn't come from shouting the loudest or charging the fastest. It came from calm, from knowledge, from timing. That's the lesson. The squad shifted uncomfortably. Daniels stared at the ground, scuffing his boot in the dust. Chun nodded slowly, almost reverently. Lewis folded his arms, but said nothing, his silence carrying agreement more than defiance. Miller continued. Out there, when it's real, not a training dummy, not a whistle, but real, you don't get 12 chances. You don't even get 2. You get 1. And if you waste it because you ignored the person who actually knew what to do, people die. That's the truth. His words sank into them like heavy stones. No one dared to argue. Emily felt heat rise in her chest. She wanted to look away, but Miller's eyes stayed on her. For once, though, it didn't feel like a spotlight she wanted to escape. It felt like an acknowledgement she couldn't avoid. Miller's voice softened slightly. Carter, you taught me something too. I pride myself on knowing my squad, on seeing their strengths. But I missed yours. That's on me. And it won't happen again. The admission caught the recruits off guard. Miller wasn't a man who offered vulnerability easily. To hear him say I missed something was almost unthinkable. Emily's throat tightened. She managed a nod, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you, Sergeant. Don't thank me, he said, his tone hardening again. Just keep proving it. The morning drills began, but they were different now. When Emily gave instructions, the others listened. Daniels, though reluctant, carried the stretcher without complaint. Chun's hands no longer trembled under pressure. Lewis, who had once dismissed her as just another recruit, moved in sync with her timing as if they had trained together for years. By mid-morning, the squad had completed 3 drills back-to-back without error. Miller's sharp whistle ended the third, and instead of the usual lecture, he simply gave a curt nod. For him, that was as close to praise as they would get. During a short break, Daniels finally approached Emily, wiping sweat from his brow. So, I guess you're not so quiet after all, he said, his tone awkward but sincere. Emily raised an eyebrow. I'm still quiet, I just spoke when it mattered. Daniels let out a short laugh. Fair enough. Guess I should start shutting up more often. Wouldn't hurt, Lewis muttered, passing by with a canteen. Daniels shot him a glare, but the tension dissolved quickly into a rare chuckle from the squad. For the first time, there was no edge in their voices, just camaraderie. Chun sat beside Emily during the break, fiddling with his gloves. You know, he said softly, when you told me I was doing fine yesterday, I actually believed it. No one's ever said that to me before, not in training. Emily glanced at him, surprised. You needed to hear it. Yeah, Chun admitted, his eyes fixed on the ground. "I did." Their conversation was cut short by Miller's barked orders, but the words lingered in Emily's mind. She realized then that her strength wasn't just in her hands or her knowledge. It was in the way she steadied others, the way her calm created calm around her. That afternoon, Miller called them into formation once more. His voice carried across the sand, commanding yet thoughtful. "Alpha Squad, I don't care what you thought before yesterday. From now on, you're a unit. And a unit listens. To each other. To the quiet ones. To the ones you don't expect. If you can't do that, then you're nothing but dead weight. But if you can," he paused, scanning their faces, "then you'll be something worth leading." His words struck deeper than any punishment could. For the first time, the recruits didn't just hear him, they understood him. As the sun dipped low again, casting long shadows across the desert, the squad marched back to camp with something new in their stride. They weren't just individuals trying to survive training anymore. They were starting to move like a team. Emily walked among them, no longer trailing behind, no longer invisible. She didn't need to speak often, her presence was enough. And when her eyes met Miller's across the line, she saw the flicker of something rare in his gaze. Respect. It was fragile still, but it was real. And as the camp settled into the quiet hum of evening, Emily knew one thing for certain. The lesson wasn't just about her proving herself. It was about all of them learning to listen, to trust, and to see strength where they never thought to look. The squad wasn't finished yet. The hardest tests were still ahead. But for the first time, they believed they could face them together. The desert dawn arrived again, pale and still, as Alpha Squad gathered for their final training exercise of the week. The morning chill bit at their skin, but it was different this time, lighter, tempered with confidence. Gone were the stiff shoulders, the anxious eyes, the unspoken fear of failure. In their place was a quiet determination, a cohesion that hadn't existed before. Emily Carter stood among them, helmet tucked neatly under her arm. She had grown used to the weight of attention, though it still made her stomach flutter. Her calm was no longer just a shield. It had become a force, steadying the others around her. Sergeant Miller approached, his expression unreadable at first, then softened slightly as he stopped before the squad. "Today is not about drills," he said, voice carrying across the sand. "It's about proving what you've learned. Not just tactics, not just efficiency, but trust. Trust in yourselves, and trust in each other. Alpha Squad, you are not just individuals anymore. You are a team." The squad straightened, shoulders squared. Daniels, once brash and reckless, adjusted his gear with newfound focus. Chun's hands, steady for the first time all day, gripped the straps of his kit with confidence. Lewis's eyes scanned the line of recruits, ensuring they moved in sync. And in the center of it all was Emily, the quiet girl who had taught them all the value of calm leadership. Miller's gaze lingered on her. "Carter," he said, his voice low but commanding, "you've changed this squad more than you know. Don't ever forget that. Your strength is not in your loudness or in your eagerness. It's in your focus, your skill, and your willingness to act when it matters most. That's a lesson worth remembering." Emily nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. For the first time, she truly believed she belonged. She had always been cautious, hesitant to draw attention, convinced her presence was insignificant. Now, she understood that even the quietest voice could carry the heaviest impact. The whistle blew, signaling the start of the final exercise. This time, chaos was replaced by order. Each recruit moved with purpose, following Emily's steady guidance. Daniels lifted the stretcher without hesitation. Chun applied pressure to the simulated wound with precision, and Lewis coordinated movements flawlessly. Emily narrated calmly, directing each step as if it were second nature. Her instructions were concise but firm, and for the first time, her squad followed without question. There were no mistakes, no fumbling, no panic, only synchronized action. A rhythm forged through shared respect and trust. Sergeant Miller watched from the side, arms crossed, a rare smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The squad's efficiency was undeniable, a testament to the quiet girl who had refused to remain invisible. The drill concluded flawlessly. The whistle shrieked its final note, signaling not just success, but mastery. Emily stepped back, letting the others settle around her. For a brief moment, there was silence, filled only by the soft wind rustling across the sand. Then Miller spoke. "Well done," he said, voice steady. "All of you. Today, you proved that competence beats chaos, focus beats fear, and trust beats doubt. And you, Carter, you proved that leadership doesn't have to shout to be heard." The squad exchanged glances, smiles creeping onto tired faces. Daniels gave Emily a nod of respect. Chun allowed himself a small grin, and Lewis clapped her lightly on the shoulder. For the first time, Emily felt a sense of unity she had never experienced before. She was no longer just a quiet observer. She was an integral part of a team that trusted each other to survive and thrive. As the sun climbed higher, painting the desert in warm golden hues, Emily walked alongside her squad. The drills continued, but the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Laughter occasionally broke the rhythm, small victories acknowledged quietly among them. No longer were they individuals struggling in isolation. They were a unit, each member strengthened by the other. Later, as they rested under a makeshift shelter, Miller called the squad to attention. "I've been in this field long enough to know what works and what doesn't," he began, voice firm yet reflective. "But yesterday and today, I've seen something I haven't expected. You've all adapted, but one person made the difference. Carter, you've shown every one of them the power of composure, knowledge, and courage. Don't ever doubt that. And don't ever let anyone else doubt it either." Emily's throat tightened. She had never sought recognition, yet Miller's acknowledgement felt like a shield, a validation of years of preparation and quiet perseverance. Daniels spoke up, breaking the reverent silence. "Sergeant, Carter's right. If it weren't for her, we'd be still fumbling through these drills. She kept us from screwing it up completely." Chun nodded vigorously. She really saved us, literally. Even Lewis managed a small, approving smile. "I underestimated her," he admitted, quiet but sincere. "I won't make that mistake again." Miller's lips twitched, the closest he came to a grin. "Good. Learn it. Remember it. Because out there, on the battlefield or anywhere else, underestimating someone can get you killed. Today, Carter didn't just save the drill. She saved each of you from failure. That's a legacy you should carry with you." Emily stood quietly, absorbing the moment. She had always doubted her voice, her place, her ability to make a difference. Now she saw the truth reflected in the eyes of her squadmates. She mattered. She had changed the course of their day, their training, their growth. As the squad packed up to leave, Emily lingered for a moment, gazing at the desert horizon. The sun glinted off the sand, bright and unforgiving, yet somehow welcoming. She thought of every failure, every hesitation, every moment of doubt she had endured. And now she saw them not as weaknesses, but as steps leading her here to the center of her own potential. Walking back to the camp, she felt a subtle shift within herself. Emily Carter, the quiet girl who had once faded into the background, now carried a presence that could not be ignored. Her calm had reshaped the squad. Her courage had saved them all. And in doing so, she had discovered her own voice, the one that mattered the most. Sergeant Miller fell into step beside her as they returned. He didn't say much, but the silence was comfortable, filled with unspoken acknowledgement. For the first time, Emily felt a genuine partnership, a recognition of mutual respect forged in the heat of pressure and the dust of repeated failure. That night, as Alpha Squad rested under the stars, Emily lay in her cot, reflecting. The drills, the failures, the fear had all led to this moment of transformation. And she realized something profound. Leadership isn't always loud. Courage isn't always visible. And the quietest person in the room can sometimes make the loudest impact. She closed her eyes, a small smile tugging at her lips. The legacy she had begun today would live on, not just in the drills they would run, but in the trust, the cohesion, and the respect that now bound her squad together. Emily Carter had stepped out of the shadows, and in doing so, she had changed everyone around her. And in the quiet desert night, that truth felt louder than any shout.